Welcome back to LMJ English, your home for immersive storytelling that helps you learn English naturally through emotion, legend, and imagination. Today's story is one of the most powerful and timeless legends ever told: The Rise and Fall of King Arthur. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Let's dive in. Introduction to the Arthurian legend. In a world where myths were more than just stories and legends were the soul of a people, the tale of King Arthur rose like morning mist over the hills of ancient Britain, soft at first, almost invisible, but destined to shine with the light of 1,000 suns. The Arthurian legend is not just a tale of a king. It is a rich tapestry woven with threads of courage, magic, love, and betrayal. It tells of knights in shining armor who lived by a sacred code, of a round table where all were equal, and of a young boy who would become the greatest king the land had ever known. But the origins of this epic tale stretch far back into the mists of time, long before ink touched parchment. They were born in the voices of Celtic bards who sang songs of warriors and wonders, their words echoing across green valleys and forested hills. These were the first keepers of Arthur's story, storytellers who carried it not in books, but in memory, heart, and spirit. Their oral traditions kept the flame alive through centuries of war, change, and silence. It was not until the 9th and 10th centuries that the name Arthur began to appear in written form. Ancient chronicles like the Historia Britonum by Nennius and the Annales Cambriae made brief mention of a valiant war leader who fought bravely against the invading Saxons. These early texts painted Arthur not as a king in golden armor, but as a fierce and shadowy figure, a glimmer of the legend that was yet to be fully born. Then, in the 12th century, the legend leapt from the shadows and into the sunlight of imagination. Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia, the history of the kings of Britain, reimagined Arthur as a mighty monarch, wise and just, ruling over a golden age of peace. But it was the French poet Chrétien de Troyes who added heart and soul to the legend. He introduced the elements that would define the Arthurian world for centuries: the enchantments of Merlin, the beauty of Queen Guinevere, the tragic love of Lancelot, and the sacred quest for the Holy Grail. Together, these storytellers transformed a warrior's name into a legend of endless depth. They added magic to reality, romance to battle, and ideals to history. The story of King Arthur became more than a chronicle of events. It became a mirror of human dreams, filled with honor, loyalty, temptation, and hope. And though the centuries have passed, that mirror still reflects our desire for a world where justice reigns, love triumphs, and even the humblest soul can rise to greatness. Debate over Arthur's historical existence. Was King Arthur a real man, flesh and blood, who once rode across the misty hills of Britain with sword in hand and justice in his heart? Or was he merely a dream, a symbol shaped by poets, molded by kings, and polished by the passage of time? This question has stirred the minds of historians and dreamers alike for centuries, and the answer continues to shimmer just beyond the veil of certainty. Some believe that Arthur was a true historical figure, not the majestic king of golden legend, but a rugged war leader who lived in the turbulent years following the fall of the Roman Empire. Britain at the time was a fractured land, under siege from Saxon invaders, with no strong central power to unite its people. In this chaos, the idea of a single brave warrior rising up to protect his homeland captured the imagination of the people. Some scholars suggest that Arthur may have been a Romano-British commander, perhaps named Artorius, who led a series of battles against the encroaching Saxons in the 5th or 6th century. If so, he would have been a man of grit and grit alone, not crowned with jewels but with the trust of those he fought beside. Yet, as records from that era are scarce and often blurred by myth, others argue that Arthur never existed in a literal sense. To them, he is a figure born from the heart of folklore, a shining example of the kind of leader people longed for in times of darkness. He was hope carved into story. In this view, Arthur is not one man, but many, a collection of traits, ideals, and ancient memories stitched together over generations to create a larger-than-life hero. He is perhaps the dream of Britain itself, its spirit given form through legend. Over the centuries, the lines between truth and myth grew ever more entangled. Each retelling, from monkish scribes to medieval poets to modern filmmakers, added another layer of richness and of confusion. Was the sword Excalibur real? Did Camelot truly stand with its round table and its noble knights? Or were these creations of the human soul meant not to record history, but to inspire it? Regardless of where the truth lies, one thing remains undeniable. The legend of King Arthur has had an enormous impact on the cultural memory of the Western world. Whether real or imagined, he has lived for over 1,000 years in the hearts of people who believe in courage, in loyalty, and in the possibility of greatness, even when the world seems lost. Arthur may never have worn a crown in life, but in legend he wears one still, and perhaps in the end that is what truly matters: Arthur's birth and rise to power. In a time when magic and mortal power still walked hand in hand, and destiny whispered through the leaves of the ancient forests, a child was born, one who would grow to unite a broken land and become the heart of a legend. But Arthur's path to the throne was not paved with ease or clarity. It was a path shrouded in secrecy, mystery, and fate, woven together by the hands of both kings and wizards. His story begins with Uther Pendragon, the mighty and ambitious King of Britain, whose heart was ensnared by the beauty of Igraine, the Duchess of Cornwall. There was only one problem. Igraine was already married to Duke Gaulois, a loyal and noble man, but love, or perhaps obsession, rarely listens to reason. Desperate to possess her, Uther turned to the only man who could bend reality itself. Merlin the Enchanter, the wizard, wise and enigmatic, agreed to help Uther win Igraine's love, but at a steep price. He asked for the child that would be born of their union. Using his powers, Merlin disguised Uther in Gaulois' form, allowing him to enter Tintagel Castle and spend a night with Igraine. That very night, far from the walls of the castle, the real Duke Gaulois was slain in battle. When news reached Igraine, her grief was overwhelming, but in time she married Uther, never suspecting the truth of that enchanted evening. And in the quiet shadows of the royal chamber, a boy was born. His name was Arthur. True to his word, Uther gave the infant Arthur to Merlin, who spirited him away under the veil of secrecy. The child was raised in the household of Sir Ector, a noble knight who raised Arthur as his own, alongside his foster brother Kay. Arthur knew nothing of his royal blood, nothing of the magical forces that swirled around his destiny. He grew up humble, kind, and curious, qualities that would one day set him apart from all other men. Years passed. Uther Pendragon died without naming a clear heir, and chaos gripped the kingdom. Warlords and nobles fought for power, and the land teetered on the edge of ruin. In the midst of this uncertainty, Merlin once again emerged, carrying with him a miracle. In the heart of the city a sword appeared, driven deep into a stone, gleaming in the sunlight like a shard of the stars. Upon it was an inscription: "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone is rightwise king born of all England." One by one, the strongest and proudest men of the realm tried their hands. None succeeded. The sword remained unmoved, as though it waited, patiently, silently, for the one it had chosen. Then came the day of a grand tournament. Arthur, now a young squire, attended with his brother Kay. When Kay's sword went missing, Arthur hurried to find a replacement. By chance, or perhaps by fate, he came upon the sword in the stone. Not knowing its significance, he pulled it free with ease. The onlookers were stunned. Whispers turned to shouts, and suspicion turned to awe. Arthur, as the boy no one knew, had done what no other could. At first, many nobles refused to accept him. He was too young, too unknown. But when Merlin revealed his true heritage, that he was Uther's son and heir, the resistance slowly faded. One by one, the lords and knights knelt before him. A king had risen not from glory, but from humility. And so Arthur took the crown, not with conquest, but with quiet courage. Guided by Merlin's wisdom and armed with the legendary sword Excalibur, Arthur began his reign. Under his rule, the kingdom would find hope again. Peace returned to the land. Justice took root, and the dream of Camelot, a realm of honor, equality and light, began to take shape. From the shadows of secrecy to the throne of destiny, Arthur's rise was more than a tale of kingship. It was the beginning of something eternal, the birth of a legend that would never fade. Establishment of Camelot. With Excalibur in his hand and destiny at his side, Arthur began to shape not just a kingdom, but a vision, a dream forged in hope, justice, and unity. The land he inherited was fractured and bruised by years of war and betrayal. Yet within him burned a belief that a better world was possible, a realm where might would serve right, where the sword would defend the innocent, and where no man would stand above another by birth alone. From that belief, Camelot was born. Camelot was not just a city of stone and towers. It was an idea, a beacon of light in a dark and uncertain age. Nestled among the green hills of ancient Britain, it rose with white walls, golden spires, and bustling streets filled with laughter, music, and the scent of wildflowers drifting on the wind. But its true strength lay not in its architecture, but in the ideals it stood for. It was here that Arthur summoned the greatest knights of the realm, men of courage, honor, and heart, and formed a brotherhood unlike any the world had known, the Knights of the Round Table. The Round Table itself was a marvel of symbolism and purpose, a perfect circle, vast and elegant. It held no head and no foot. No one could sit above another, not even the king. Each knight had his name engraved in gold upon his seat, a sign that his voice, his honor, and his duty were equal to all others. The table had once belonged to King Leodegrance of Cameliard, Guinevere's father, who gave it as a gift when Arthur sought his daughter's hand in marriage. And what a union it was! Guinevere, the radiant queen, was known not just for her beauty, but for her grace, wisdom, and deep sense of justice. Her marriage to Arthur was more than a royal celebration. It was the binding of two souls committed to the dream of a just and peaceful kingdom. Together, they ruled with fairness, compassion, and a desire to bring healing to a wounded land. Under Arthur's rule, Camelot flourished. The weak were protected, the poor were heard, and the guilty were judged not by power but by truth. The knights swore an oath to serve the realm, to defend the helpless, to speak no untruth, and to seek justice above all else. Among them stood legends in their own right: the noble Lancelot, the brave Gawain, the pure Galahad, the steadfast Percival, and many more. Their stories would soon stretch across kingdoms and centuries, carried in song and scroll alike, but none of it would have been possible without Merlin, Arthur's ever-watchful guide and advisor. He was the silent architect behind many of Arthur's choices, offering counsel, vision, and when needed a touch of magic. With his foresight and Arthur's leadership, Camelot became not just a court, but a symbol, the very heart of a golden age. Yet even as peace reigned and joy filled, the whole shadows whispered at the edges of the dream. For no kingdom, no matter how noble, is immune to the trials of human hearts. But in that moment, in the bright beginning of Arthur's reign, Camelot stood unshaken, a place where the impossible seemed possible, and where men and women believed that goodness could rule the world. Adventures of the Knights of the Round Table. As Camelot blossomed into a kingdom admired by all, it was not its wealth nor its walls that made it truly great, but the deeds of the noble knights who rode out from its gates, each sworn to live by the sacred code of chivalry. These were no ordinary warriors. They were seekers of justice, defenders of the innocent, and champions of truth. Together, they formed the heart of the Round Table. Yet each one carried a unique soul, a private struggle, and a personal story that would echo through the centuries. Their lives were not lived in comfort within castle halls, but on the road, through dark forests, across wind-swept moors, and into the very teeth of danger. Every quest was a mirror, revealing not just their strength, but their character. Each knight faced not only monsters of legend, but trials of the spirit. Sir Lancelot du Lac, the greatest knight of them all, was both a blessing and a curse to Camelot. Raised by the Lady of the Lake in a realm of enchantment, Lancelot was peerless with a blade. His courage on the battlefield was matched only by the depth of his loyalty to King Arthur. Yet even the strongest of hearts can crack, and Lancelot's devotion was tested by a love he could not deny, his forbidden passion for Queen Guinevere. Though his adventures were many, rescuing maidens from tyrants, slaying foul beasts, and defeating traitorous knights, it was the war within, his own soul, that would one day bring Camelot to its knees. For all his heroism, Lancelot's story would be remembered as both glorious and tragic. Then came Sir Galahad, Lancelot's own son, born not of sin but of divine purpose. Galahad was not forged in flame but in light, a knight of unmatched purity, untouched by the world's corruption. From the moment he first sat at the Round Table, it was clear he was different. While others sought glory, Galahad sought grace. It was he who would fulfill the greatest quest of them all, the journey to find the Holy Grail, the sacred vessel of Christ. On his path, he met angels, saints, and visions of the divine. He passed through lands no other knight could survive, his faith shielding him like armor no smith could forge. In the end, Galahad did not return to Camelot, for he was taken by the heavens, rewarded not with a crown, but with eternal peace. Sir Gawain, loyal nephew to King Arthur, was the heart of the Round Table, fierce in battle, loyal to the end, and known for his fiery spirit. His most famous adventure began not with a battle, but a challenge. A strange green knight arrived at Camelot and dared any man to strike him. so long as he could return the blow a year later. Gawain accepted, and with one mighty swing, he beheaded the intruder. But the knight stood again, his severed head in hand, and reminded Gawain to meet him 1 year hence. The journey that followed tested not his sword, but his honesty, humility, and humanity. When Gawain finally knelt before the Green Knight, it was not for combat but confession, and in that moment he learned that true courage lies in admitting one's flaws. And then there was Sir Percival, the innocent. When he first arrived at Camelot, he wore wild clothes and asked foolish questions. He had lived in the woods all his life, his mother hiding him from the world, so he might not die in battle like his father. But destiny found him anyway. His journey was not about strength or wit, but growth. As he rode across strange lands and met both wise hermits and wicked foes, Percival slowly shed his naivety. His path led him too to the Holy Grail, and though he did not claim it as Galahad did, he gained something greater: wisdom, compassion, and the understanding that nobility is not in birth, but in how one chooses to live. Their names filled the songs of bards and the dreams of children. Tristan, who loved Isolde with a heart torn between duty and desire; Sir Bors, who wrestled with the call of heaven and the bonds of blood; Sir Bedivere, Arthur's most loyal companion, who would one day carry Excalibur back to the lake from whence it came. Together, these knights faced dragons that breathed, fire and sorcerers who conjured storms, but their most dangerous enemies were always within: pride, jealousy, temptation, and fear. Some knights returned to Camelot bearing trophies and tales. Others vanished, never to be seen again, their fate known only to the stars. But each quest added another thread to the great tapestry of Arthur's reign, a living, breathing legend, written not in ink, but in deeds. Yet for all their glory, the adventures of the Round Table were more than just tales of triumph. They were reflections of humanity, imperfect, striving, hopeful. These knights showed the world that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. They reminded all who listened that chivalry was not a suit of armor, but a way of life. And though time would wear away the walls of Camelot and scatter its knights to history, their stories would live on, eternal, shining, whispered from one generation to the next, the quest for the Holy Grail. Of all the adventures that passed through the gates of Camelot, none was more sacred or more perilous than the quest for the Holy Grail. It was not merely a journey across lands, but a passage through the soul. The Grail was no ordinary treasure. It was said to be the very cup used by Jesus Christ at the Last Supper, and later the vessel that caught his blood at the crucifixion. To find it was to be touched by the divine. To seek it was to risk everything. The call to the Grail came not with trumpets, but with a vision, a radiant cup floating above the Round Table, dazzling the knights in golden light before vanishing into mist. Silence fell, heavy and holy. The knights looked to one another, and in that moment many knew they had been chosen, or perhaps tested. But the Grail could not be found with swords or maps. It was hidden behind veils of spirit and soul, guarded by trials meant to reveal the heart of a knight. And so began the most profound quest of all, a journey not to conquer the world, but to conquer oneself. Sir Galahad led the way. The son of Lancelot and the maiden Elaine, he was born for this purpose. Raised in purity, guided by faith, Galahad was said to be free of sin, a vessel as untainted as the Grail itself. Wherever he rode, miracles followed. Lions lay at his feet, rivers parted for him, demons turned away. He sought no fame, only the grace of God. In time, Galahad reached the hidden temple where the Grail rested, shimmering in stillness. When he laid eyes upon it, he wept, not from sorrow, but from joy so deep it broke his earthly ties. In a final act of divine favor, Galahad was lifted from the mortal world, his quest complete, his soul fulfilled. Sir Percival, once naive and full of wonder, followed a different path. His journey was long and filled with confusion, mistakes, and lessons. He met holy hermits and faced terrible temptations. In one moment, he even failed to ask the question that would have unlocked the Grail's secret. Yet he grew. He learned humility, patience, and spiritual insight. Though he did not achieve the Grail as Galahad did, Percival's transformation from a wild youth to a wise and gentle knight became a story of redemption in itself, a reminder that seeking is often more important than finding. Then there was Sir Lancelot, the bravest and most tormented of all. He longed to find the Grail, to wash away his guilt, to prove that even the fallen could rise. But his love for Queen Guinevere, though deep and sincere, became his stumbling stone. In dreams he saw the Grail, glowing and glorious, but when he reached for it, it vanished. Angels turned their faces. He fell to his knees broken, realizing that the truest quests cannot be won with strength alone. Though he returned to Camelot empty-handed, Lancelot gained something far more powerful, an understanding of his flaws and the burden of grace denied. Not every knight who rode out returned. Some were never seen again, lost to the wilderness of the world or to the wilderness of the soul. Others came back weary and wounded, their eyes shadowed by things they could not explain. The quest for the Grail had changed them all. It revealed who they truly were, stripped them of pride, and whispered truths that could not be unlearned. But the Grail's appearance was not only a gift, it was also a warning. For with its revelation came a shift in Camelot. The purest knight was gone, the strongest knight was shaken, the Round Table was never the same. What began as a holy mission would quietly mark the beginning of the end. For with divine light often comes the exposure of hidden cracks. Still, the legend of the Grail endures, a symbol not of perfection, but of pursuit. It teaches that the holiest things cannot be claimed by force, only approached with humility. It reminds us that the journey inward is the most difficult of all, and that sometimes the greatest reward is simply to seek with an honest heart. The love triangle, Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot. In the golden age of Camelot, where the banners of chivalry flew high and justice was the very soul of the kingdom, there brewed a quiet storm. It began as something small, something unspoken, but it would grow into a force so powerful that it would tear apart everything King Arthur had built. This storm had no name at first, only glances and silences. But in time, it would be known as the greatest love and the deepest betrayal ever whispered in legend, the tragic triangle of Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot. At the center stood Queen Guinevere, not only a royal consort, but the very heart of Camelot's grace. She was a woman of strength and serenity, with a mind as sharp as any blade and a soul both proud and kind. To the people she was an icon of beauty and virtue. To Arthur she was his most cherished companion. Their marriage was not one of conquest or politics alone. It was forged in mutual respect and affection. But love in a royal court is a fragile, Flower constantly watched, constantly tested. Into this delicate balance came Sir Lancelot, Arthur's most loyal knight. He had been raised by the Lady of the Lake, trained not only in the art of war but in the values of knightly honor. Lancelot was everything a hero should be, bold, noble, brave, and yet beneath the shining armor he carried a lonely heart. His admiration for Guinevere began as a quiet devotion, the reverent love of a knight for his queen. But in time, admiration turned into longing, and longing, in its silence, grew into love. At first they resisted. Both were bound by duty, and both loved Arthur in their own way. Guinevere as wife, Lancelot as friend and vassal. They tried to bury their feelings beneath layers of decorum and silence. But passion is not so easily caged. In stolen moments, a lingering touch, a glance too long, a smile shared in secret, their hearts betrayed them. Their love, pure in emotion but sinful in circumstance, remained hidden for a time. Yet no secret stays secret in a court filled with whispers. Some noticed the way Lancelot's eyes followed the queen. Others questioned why Guinevere's laughter faded when Lancelot rode off on quests. Jealousy bloomed among the knights. Suspicion grew. And as the cracks widened, they reached the ears of the one man whose heart could be broken by them, King Arthur. Arthur was a man of justice, a ruler who believed in reason and mercy. But he was also a man, a husband, a friend. 2. Suspect betrayal was to admit that his perfect kingdom had a flaw, and that flaw ran through the two people he trusted most. Still he said nothing. Perhaps he hoped it wasn't true. Perhaps he prayed it would pass, but fate would not be silenced. When their affair was finally revealed, whether through confession or treachery, the court exploded. Brothers in arms turned against each other. The Round Table, once a symbol of unity, became a battlefield of loyalties. Some knights stood by Arthur, furious at the queen's betrayal. Others defended Lancelot, believing love could not be judged so harshly. Arthur, torn between love and law, made the hardest decision of his life. Bound by his duty as king, he sentenced Guinevere to be burned at the stake for adultery, a punishment he delivered with trembling hands and a broken heart. But Lancelot, ever the knight and now the desperate lover, stormed Camelot in a blaze. Of fury and passion, he rescued Guinevere from her fate, cutting down his former brothers and fleeing into exile, taking her with him. Blood soaked the soil where once peace had bloomed. Arthur did not give chase, not at first. The weight of betrayal sat too heavily on his soul. He had lost his queen, his dearest friend, and the unity of his realm in one swift blow. And Camelot. It was no longer the shining dream it had once been. The seeds of its fall had been sown. This love triangle was more than a scandal. It was the breaking of a dream. It showed the world that even the noblest hearts can falter. That love, for all its beauty, can wound as deeply as any sword. And that even in a kingdom built on ideals, it is the fragile, imperfect nature of human love that defines our greatest tragedies, and so the legend lives on, not because it ended in happily ever after, but because it didn't, because in their flawed, aching humanity, Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot became something more than myth. They became real. They became eternal. Mordred's betrayal and the fall of Camelot. Every golden age must one day dim, and for Camelot, that darkness came in the form of a man born from shadow, a child of blood and betrayal named Mordred. His name was never meant to echo through the halls of legend. He was not a hero raised on noble tales or shaped by the chivalric code. He was the ghost at the feast, the unanswered question in King Arthur's past, and he would become the architect of Camelot's undoing. Mordred was Arthur's son, though not by love or even by choice. He was born of a twisted union between the king and his half-sister, Morgause, a woman who used seduction and secrecy to ensnare her brother, unknowingly to both of them. When Arthur learned the truth of Mordred's birth, he was horrified. Prophecy. Warned that this child would one day bring ruin to his kingdom. In desperation, Arthur ordered that all infants born on the same day be cast into the sea. But fate, as always, had other plans. Mordred survived. He was raised far from Camelot's walls, far from Arthur's guidance, nurtured instead by bitterness, manipulation, and the poisonous whispers of those who despised the king. Chief among them was Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, a sorceress whose hatred for her brother festered like a wound. She saw in Mordred not a child but a weapon, one forged by fate, destined to break the Round Table in two. When Mordred finally arrived at Camelot, he came not with vengeance, but with a mask. He knelt to Arthur, he spoke of loyalty, he took his place among the knights, earning their trust with a cunning charm, and Arthur, perhaps blinded by guilt or hope, welcomed him. For a time, Mordred played the part well, but behind his courteous words lay a cold and calculating heart. He did not believe in the ideals of Camelot. He saw them as illusions, noble lies wrapped in silk. As the kingdom reeled from the scandal of Lancelot and Guinevere, Mordred saw his chance. With Arthur distracted and the fellowship fractured, he made his move. While the king was away, Mordred seized the throne, declaring himself ruler of Britain, and even seeking to wed Guinevere, not out of love, but as a final insult to his father's name. Guinevere, horrified, fled, while messengers rode to Arthur with the terrible news. What followed was not a courtly debate, but a civil war. Brothers who once rode side by side now drew swords against each other. The fields of Britain, once green and blooming, turned to blood and ash. The final battle took place on the stark and stormy plains of Camlan, beneath skies as grey as morning veils. There father and son faced each other at last, not with words, but with steel. The clash was brutal, a storm of sorrow and fury. Mordred, filled with hatred, struck a terrible blow, mortally wounding Arthur. But with his last breath of strength, the king drove his blade through Mordred's heart. The son died cursing the father fell grieving the son. As Mordred's body crumpled to the ground, Arthur collapsed too, bleeding from a wound that could not be healed. Not by magic, not by hope, not by time. With Arthur's fall, Camelot unravelled. The Round Table was shattered. The knights were scattered, dead, missing, or lost in exile. The ideals of chivalry that once burned, so brightly flickered, faded, and finally went dark. Only a handful remained, like Sir Bedivere, who weeping returned Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake, casting it back into the depths from which it came. Arthur, the once and future king, was taken to Avalon, a place beyond this world, where it is said he sleeps still, waiting to return when Britain needs him most. Thus ended the dream of Camelot, not with a sudden strike, but with a slow unravelling of the very values it stood for. And yet in that ending, a seed was planted. For though the kingdom fell, the legend lived on. It whispered through the pages of books, the brushstrokes of paintings, the chords of songs. It lived not in stone, but in story, and stories, like kings, never truly die. The legacy of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Time has claimed the stones of Camelot, worn down its towers and scattered its banners to the winds of history. The swords have rusted. The voices that once echoed in its great halls are now silent, and yet King Arthur still lives, not in body, perhaps, but in spirit, in memory, in the pulse of legend. His story and those of his noble knights did not perish with the fall of a kingdom. Instead, they crossed the threshold of time and entered something far more enduring, the realm of myth. In the centuries that followed Arthur's death at Camlann, storytellers across the world picked up the fragments of his tale and breathed new life into them. What began as scattered mentions in early chronicles became a sweeping epic, shaped, reshaped, and transformed to suit every age. Each retelling, whether in parchment, paint, or performance, carried the same flame: the belief that greatness lies not in conquest, but in the courage to dream. Sir Thomas Malory, writing in the 15th century, gathered centuries of tales into a single sorrowful masterpiece, Le Morte d'Arthur. His version gave Arthur his final shape, a noble king undone not by enemies, but by the flaws of the human heart. It captured the elegance and the tragedy, the sword and the sorrow, the splendor and the shadows. Later, in the Victorian era, Alfred Lord Tennyson would craft his poetic idylls of the king, using the legend to reflect the moral ideals of his time. And in the modern era, T.H. White's The Once and Future King would reintroduce Arthur to a world at war, portraying him not as a warrior, but as a philosopher king trying to make sense of power, justice, and mercy. But the legacy of Arthur reaches far beyond books. His story has become a mirror held up to humanity, a myth that grows and bends with the values of every new generation. In paintings we see Guinevere's quiet sorrow, Lancelot's tortured loyalty, the shimmer of the Grail. In theatre we hear the voices of knights grappling with temptation and truth. In films, from grand epics to comedic parodies, the Round Table still spins. In television, Camelot rises and falls again, reflecting our hopes and our flaws. More than that, Arthur's tale has become a moral compass. His court was a dream of equality in a world of hierarchy. The Round Table symbolized unity, fairness, and a voice for all. His knights were not chosen for birthright, but for bravery, honor, and service to others. The Grail quest remains the ultimate metaphor for the search for meaning, for something greater than ourselves. Arthur's legacy is not perfection. He was a good man who tried to build a better world and failed, not because he was weak, but because the dream was too vast, too delicate, and too human. And yet, even in that failure, we find inspiration. We see that striving for greatness, even knowing it may fall, is a victory in itself. His fall does not make him less heroic, it makes him real. The legend lives in our language too. Camelot has come to mean an age of glory and idealism. The phrase "once and future king" speaks to the timeless nature of Arthur's spirit, the idea that he will return when the world needs him most. And perhaps, in some quiet way, he already has. Every time someone stands up for justice, every time a leader chooses wisdom over wrath, every time a person chooses honor over gain, the spirit of Arthur rides again. His story continues because we need it. In a world so often broken by division and darkness, Arthur reminds us that there once was, and could be again, a place where honor mattered, where truth was sacred, and where even flawed hearts could strive for something higher. So no, Camelot did not end at Camlan. It lives wherever we tell its story. It lives in the hearts of dreamers and those who dare to hope. It lives in every noble act, every brave decision, every quiet moment of kindness. Arthur's sword may sleep beneath the lake, but the ideals it stood for, justice, courage, and the dream of a fair and shining world, still gleam, and as long as there are voices to sing and hearts to listen, King Arthur will never truly fall. If you found this story inspiring, moving, or simply unforgettable, please like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Your support means the world and gives us the energy to bring even more powerful and meaningful stories to life. Don't forget to subscribe to LMJ English for more legendary stories told with emotion and purpose. Here are 20 key vocabulary words and phrases that appear repeatedly throughout the full Arthurian story, along with English explanations tailored for learning and understanding. Chivalry, a moral and social code followed by knights focusing on honor, bravery, loyalty, courtesy, and protecting the weak. Quest, a long journey or mission, often involving adventure and challenges, typically in search of something valuable or sacred. Legend, a traditional story often passed down through generations that mixes historical facts with fiction or myth. Betrayal, the act of being disloyal or breaking trust, especially between close allies, friends, or loved ones. Loyalty, a strong feeling of support or allegiance, especially shown by the knights toward their king and each other. Honor, a sense of ethical conduct and personal integrity, a key value for King Arthur and his knights. Destiny, a predetermined course of events, often portrayed as something that cannot be changed, guiding Arthur's rise and fall. Excalibur, the magical sword of King Arthur, symbolizing divine kingship, power, and rightful leadership. Round Table, a symbolic table created by Arthur, where all knights had equal status, representing unity and fairness. Camelot, the legendary castle and court of King Arthur, symbolizing an ideal kingdom of justice, peace, and equality. Sorceress, a woman who uses magic like Morgan Le Fay, often influencing events with supernatural powers. Kingdom, a land ruled by a king or queen. In this story, Britain under Arthur's reign. Sacrifice, giving up something valuable for a higher cause, shown in many knights' quests and Arthur's leadership. Temptation, a desire to do something wrong or forbidden, a recurring theme, especially in the love triangle and Grail quests. Prophecy, a prediction about the future, often believed to be divinely inspired, such as the one foretelling Mordred's betrayal. Fall of Camelot, a term symbolizing the collapse of something great and noble, often due to internal flaws or betrayal. Divine, related to God or sacred power, often describing the Holy Grail or Galahad's vision. Forgiveness, letting go of anger or the desire for revenge, often discussed in moments of betrayal or repentance. Valor, great courage in the face of danger, especially in battle or on dangerous quests. Mythical, something from legend or mythology, not proven by history, but rich in symbolic meaning.